It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villeminot. Hi, Flo. France is so famous for being a leader in fashion, but it's also trying to become a leader in the fight against what some might call the dark side of fashion. That's unrealistic body images that can actually lead to eating disorders.
Well, it's no secret that editing and airbrushing are kind of the norm when it comes to fashion and advertising. In just a couple of clicks, you can completely transform a picture. You'll be able to see it happening. Now, many people in the industry actually defend this practice of transforming photos in the name of aesthetics. Let's take a listen.
Now we have to change those ears. Doesn't she look better like that? Her arm makes it fold. It's ugly. Same near her hip. We need to remove that. We improved the photos a lot, actually.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of our viewers, but not just them. France's Ministry of Health actually has a real issue with that kind of thing, to the point where lawmakers recently implemented a new law that's getting lots of attention in France.
It's a really interesting law. So since the 1st of October 2017, any commercial photo that has been digitally retouched has to bear this label that says photo retouchée, so essentially that the photo has been modified. And lawmakers mean business. Anyone who violates this law could face a fine of up to 37,500 euros. Now, the lawmakers behind this law say that the idea is to kind of change people's mindsets about what the perfect woman should look like in society and release some of the pressure that drives everyone to try to be so perfect. Let's listen.
The aim is to change minds, to have people realize that these women aren't real in the sense that the photo has been modified. People need to know that these aren't real women, that it's just an image.
The misrepresentation of bodies in our society can have devastating consequences. It can create psychological trauma and lead to eating disorders. People are encouraged to imitate things that are unrealistic.
And the aim of this law is to protect people, particularly young people.
Indeed, and the statistics are pretty alarming. In France, eating disorders are the second leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds, this after road accidents. So it's quite alarming. Now, this isn't France's first attempt to try and combat eating disorders. There's a law that dates back to 2015 that punishes anyone who advocates excessive thinness. For instance, people who have anorexia, pro-anorexia websites, they can face up to a year in jail and a fine of more than 10,000 euros. So there are many measures out there, legal measures, but it's interesting because even the fashion industry in France is trying to step up. For instance, recently you had the French fashion powerhouses LVMH and Kering that banned their designers from using super skinny models.
And as it is, there's so much pressure here in France already to be thin, particularly for women.
At any given time, it's thought that about 80% of French women are on some kind of a diet, which goes against that myth that French women are naturally skinny, particularly Parisians, it must be said. But it is a reputation that we French women have. It's been the subject of so many books. There was that bestseller, Why French Women Don't Get Fat, for instance. And sociologists say that there's actually an economic explanation to all this.
For women in France, being thin is like an extra diploma that the labour market recognises financially. The thinner you are, the easier it will be to find a job, and the more money you'll make. It also reduces your chances of being unemployed. In a way, it's rational to try and be as thin as possible.
Now, this cult of thinness can lead to a certain stigma on people who are overweight.
Indeed, and there is a French woman who is in the spotlight because she has actually called out what you might call France's fat shaming, particularly in the workplace. You can see a photo of her here. She was featured in this article in The Guardian. Her name is Gabrielle Didier. She wrote a book called You're Not Born Fat that details what she calls France's particular fear of being overweight. She calls it grossophobie, sizeism. But it's really interesting because if you look at the statistics, this myth that France is a nation of thin people is completely blown out of the water. It's a myth. It's not reality. You can see 5 in 10 French people are overweight or obese, and it can go all the way up to 7 out of 10 in 2030. Now, like many parts in the world, this reality isn't yet reflected in magazines, in advertisements, but there is some change on the way.
These days, society wants more representativeness and diversity. The fashion industry used to be able to do whatever it wanted. But these days, social media is so powerful that women have managed to influence what's in style.
So there is a little bit of change, but France still has a long way to go. For instance, in France, there aren't really role models, rounder role models, women who are celebrated for their curves. Perhaps that'll be coming down the line.
That would be a good thing. Thank you so much for that, Flo. Florence Villeminot there with French Connections this week. And don't forget, if you have any questions for Flo, things you'd like her to examine for you about how things work here in France, you can always send her a tweet at Flo Villeminot.